3 years ago, the October rain pounded against the fogged-up windows of Portland General Hospital. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Inside the brightly lit, soulless delivery room, Alina Navarro lay trembling on the hospital bed, hands clenched into fists, body exhausted. She was giving birth to her first child, the baby she had once dreamed of during quiet nights, now arriving amidst chaos and heartbreak. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her skin pale with pain and fatigue after 8 relentless hours of labor. Dr. Lin barked, "One more push, Alina, just one more." But all she could hear was the roar of her heartbeat, the sound of rain smashing against glass, and the voices arguing in the hallway. A familiar, drunken male voice slurred, "Mom, not now." Then a colder, sharper female voice replied, "If it's not a boy, I don't see the point of this charade." Jake Donovan, her husband, stood beside her. The stench of whiskey oozed from his pores, overpowering even the sterile hospital scent. He took her hand, clammy, cold, and whispered, "Just breathe, baby." But Alina no longer believed in anything that came from his mouth. One final contraction hit. Her body arched, her scream split the air, and then a baby's cry broke through everything. "Ready to place her on your chest," said the doctor. And in that instant, time froze. A tiny angel, dark-haired, amber-skinned, her features still scrunched from birth, was placed on Alina's chest. The baby didn't whimper. She wailed, strong and fierce, as if to declare, "I'm here, hear me." Sienna Rose Donovan, Alina stared at her daughter, her trembling hand reaching out to touch those impossibly small fingers clenched into a perfect little fist. Milk let down, and tears streamed down her face. She whispered, breaking into quiet sobs, "You're perfect." But alongside the holiness of that moment was a hollowness. No gentle "I love you" from her husband, no warmth of family. Only the click-clack of heels echoing down the sterile floor. Miranda Donovan entered like winter wind, platinum curls in place, lipstick pristine despite the hour. Behind her came Kyle, Jake's younger brother, expression carved from stone. "How is it?" Miranda asked, voice metallic. "Oh girl, Mom, her name's Sienna Rose," Jake answered, eyes still glued to his phone. Silence. Miranda stared at the baby. Her lips thinned. Her ice blue eyes flicked from Alina to the infant. Finally, she said, "She clearly takes after her mother." The words fell like feathers, but landed like knives. Alina pulled Sienna closer, holding her like a shield against the judgment pressing in from every direction. 2 weeks after giving birth, Alina still winced every time she sat down. Her stitches ached, her eyes were hollowed by sleepless nights, and her body felt like it had never truly healed. Sienna, small and delicate, seemed to absorb the tension around her. She cried more now, slept less. Each cry sliced through Alina's chest like a knife. Jake, meanwhile, was drifting further away. He no longer offered to hold Sienna, no longer asked how she felt. His urgent errands stretched into hours, and he returned home with the unmistakable scent of alcohol clinging to him like smoke. He was still her husband on paper, but no longer in presence. Evenings became something she feared. As the sun dipped, Sienna would start to cry again, and Jake would come home silent and brooding. Sometimes Alina wondered, if she disappeared, would anyone even notice? One cold, gray morning, Alina sat cross-legged on the living room floor, rocking Sienna while folding baby clothes with one hand. She was still in her nightgown from the night before. Jake sat at the table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. He didn't look at her. He hadn't looked at her in days. The door burst open. Miranda walked in, uninvited as always, but this time she was carrying something. A shirt. She held it out toward Jake. "Smell this," she said, voice glacial. Jake took the shirt and sniffed. His face shifted instantly. "Cheap perfume," Miranda added, her tone sharpened to a blade. "And there's this." From her coat pocket she pulled a glittering silver earring. Alina felt her stomach drop, her heart stutter. Ice spread through her chest. It's not mine, she whispered. She wasn't even sure she'd spoken out loud. Jake stood up, fists clenched. You cheated on me? I haven't left the house. I've been here with Sienna every day. Save the act, he roared, slamming his fist into the table. Coffee splashed across the surface, dripping onto the floor. Sienna screamed. Milk soaked Alina's nightgown, but it was nothing compared to the chill in Jake's glare. That wasn't disappointment. It was hatred. Get out of my house, he said, voice flat and final. Jake, please, she needs her mother. You both out now. Miranda stepped forward, a document in hand. Sign this. It's a separation agreement. You leave quietly, we keep this quiet. Alina took it, her vision blurred, her name printed in bold, legal phrases that didn't feel real. Part of her wanted to fight, to scream for a lawyer, to demand fairness. But the other part, the exhausted, broken part, was silent. I need a lawyer, she said, voice shaking. Jake stepped in. His fingers gripped her arm, hard. Sign it, or I tell this whole damn city what you are. Sienna cried harder. The pen slipped in Alina's hand. Then it moved. Then it signed. 35 minutes later, she stood in the rain. Sienna curled against her chest, a single diaper bag slung over her shoulder. No coat, no suitcase, no goodbye. Her phone lit up with a message. How's baby Sienna today? From her sister. Alina stared at the screen and turned the phone off. She couldn't answer, not today. Oh, not. Not when her whole world had just been taken from her. Alina couldn't remember how far she walked that night. Her legs, trembling and numb, carried her and Sienna through freezing streets, lit only by flickering signs of closed stores. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the wind still howled, slipping down the back of her thin collar. Sienna slept in her arms, peaceful, heartbreakingly unaware. The first apartment they found was on the 3rd floor of a worn-down building in East Portland's Art District. The wooden stairs creaked under every step, and the radiator coughed uncertainly, never quite deciding whether to warm the room. But it was the only place willing to rent to someone without a steady paycheck. Just a small government check and the last scraps of savings Alina had hidden inside an old envelope at the bottom of her suitcase. She started working at a nearby diner, morning shifts, on her feet from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then she'd rush home, sleep in short bursts when Sienna did, and wake up at night to work freelance marketing gigs. The last remnants of her old life. Alina was no longer the executive she once was. No more client meetings, no more business cards with her name in gold foil, just her. A single mother, warming formula bottles with one hand, editing logos with the other, answering emails while rocking a baby with her knee. The first nights were brutal. Sienna had a light fever and coughed often. Alina didn't dare sleep more than an hour at a time. She feared she'd miss a breath, a cry. In the soft, yellow glow of the nightlight, she'd sit silently and watch Sienna sleep. Sometimes she cried without sound, from exhaustion, from loneliness, from missing the woman she used to be. She didn't tell her family. Her mother had passed when Alina was 19. Her father lived several states away and had never been close. Her younger sister, Carla, still texted every week, but Alina didn't have the strength to be honest. Every time Carla asked, "Is Sienna doing okay?" Alina would simply type, "She's fine." "I'm fine too." She learned to live quietly, patiently. Bit by bit, she began rebuilding her client files, her portfolio, her personal brand. She posted on LinkedIn, wrote blogs with marketing tips for small businesses. Eventually, the small contracts trickled in, brand audits, social media planning, website content revisions. And every time Sienna giggled, Alina felt like she was surviving, not triumphantly, but steadily, patiently, quietly. And sometimes, when the morning light crept in through the fogged window, she whispered to herself, "I'm still here." It was a Friday afternoon. The clock above the diner's counter had just passed 3 p.m. when Alina, finishing her shift, began untying her apron. Jenna, the barista, nudged her lightly on the arm. "Alina," Jenna murmured, eyes flicking toward the front window. Someone's asking for you. He doesn't look like a regular." Alina stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands with a napkin. Her eyes were still stinging from kitchen smoke and a long week of little sleep, but when her gaze fell on the man sitting near the window, time dropped out from under her. Ethan Reyes. 4 years. 4 years since she'd last seen him. The man who had knelt with a sapphire ring. The man who had once been her shelter at 25. And the man she had left without a goodbye. He hadn't aged much, just the eyes. Deeper now, quieter. A light gray button-down shirt, familiar features that made her heart trip. Ethan stood as soon as he saw her, eyes flickering with emotions she couldn't name. "Hi," he said, voice warm with ghosts of old memories. Alina froze. In her head were 1,000 sounds. Sienna's cry, the microwave bell, the leaky washing machine, and the thunder of her own heartbeat. "Ethan," she whispered, barely trusting herself to believe it. He nodded. "I've been looking for you." "For 3 years." Alina took a step back. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter as if the floor itself had tilted. Part of her wanted to run into his arms, to sob like a child, but the other part, the one that had been betrayed, discarded, hardened by survival, wanted nothing more than to disappear. "You shouldn't have come," she said, voice steady but thin. "I didn't mean to scare you, You don't know anything," she cut him off, sharp as a blade. "You don't know who I am anymore. I'm not the girl you loved." Ethan didn't argue. He just looked at her, with eyes full of all the words they'd never said. Alina turned away, leaving him there bathed in afternoon light filtered through dusty glass. She hurried toward the back exit, fingers shaking around her keys. She had just met her past again, and it wasn't nearly as gentle as she'd hoped. It was Tuesday afternoon. The outside temperature had dropped to 41 DFF, and the last few leaves clung stubbornly to the bare maple branches lining the sidewalk. Inside a cramped third-floor apartment where the windows were always fogged and the heater rarely worked, Sienna started to cough. At first, it was just a dry little tickle, the kind of cough that made a mother pause, then dismiss. But by nightfall, the cough had deepened, grown harsher. Sienna became fussy, refused to eat, whimpered through naps. Alina watched with growing unease, her instincts prickling like cold air against bare skin. She had cared for Sienna through colds and teething and long, fussy nights, but this felt different. The kind of different that clutched her chest with an invisible hand. By the second night, Sienna's fever climbed to 102 DGF. Alina didn't sleep. She sponged Sienna's body with warm cloths, wrapped her in blankets, walked her around the tiny apartment for hours. Each creak of the warped floorboards under her feet echoed the panic building inside her. Every wheezing breath Sienna took made Alina's own lungs tighten in fear. By morning, Sienna was breathing faster, her lips had turned pale, her hands damp and cold. The cough was no longer a cough, it was a battle, as if each hack tore something from her chest. Alina's fingers shook when she pressed the thermometer against her daughter's temple. 103.5 DGF. There was no choice anymore. The nearest clinic was 5 blocks away. Alina bundled Sienna tightly in a wool scarf, zipped up her own thin coat, and stepped into the misting rain. Her shoes soaked through within minutes, but she kept moving. Calling a taxi wasn't an option, not with only $43.00 in her wallet. That was milk, diapers, next week's groceries. So she ran. She arrived at the urgent care facility breathless, Sienna limp in her arms. They didn't have an appointment. The nurse said there would be a wait. Alina sat on a plastic chair, Sienna clutched to her chest, and whispered the same phrase again and again. "Mommy's here. Mommy's here." But she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince anymore. Diagnosis: early-stage pneumonia. Hospital admission recommended for observation. Alina felt something collapse inside her. "We'll need to confirm financial details before proceeding," the nurse said gently. It sounded routine, but to Alina, it was a death sentence. She didn't have the money. Her health insurance covered the basics, barely. A hospital stay? That was rent. That was survival. "Give me a few minutes," she whispered. She found a seat in the hallway and sat, head in hands, and cried. She didn't care who saw. Once, she'd walked into boardrooms with a designer laptop bag and a confident smile. Now, she sat on a cracked vinyl bench, unable to buy her daughter a hospital bed. She felt useless. Beyond broke, she felt powerless, powerless to protect the one thing that mattered most. 15 minutes later, the nurse returned with wide eyes and an odd smile. "Miss Navarro, your admission has been fully covered. A support foundation for single mothers called us. The Amber Foundation. Everything's handled. You're clear to proceed." Alina blinked. I didn't contact anyone." "They had your name," the nurse said. "They must have known you needed help." Alina sat in stunned silence. She didn't know how or why, but she didn't have time for questions. Sienna needed help, and now she would get it. 2 days later, Sienna's fever had broken. She slept soundly in a hospital crib, hooked up to monitors that blinked softly in the dark. Alina sat beside her, eyes sunken from 2 sleepless nights, back aching from hours spent curled on a hard hospital chair. She clutched a cold paper cup of coffee, mind empty from exhaustion. A familiar voice interrupted the quiet. "Still strong as ever?" She looked up. "Ethan..." He set down a fresh cup of coffee in front of her, then sat without asking. His face looked tired, but his gaze was steady. "It was you, wasn't it?" She asked quietly. He nodded. "I couldn't sit back and do nothing. I did hire someone to find you, but not to spy, just to know you were alive, and to know if you needed help." Alina stared at him. Her voice cracked, heavy with emotion and exhaustion. "You think I need saving?" "No," Ethan replied gently. "I think you've been saving yourself all this time. I just wanted to give you one place to breathe." She looked down. His words hit where she didn't want them to. The fragile, weary place inside she kept hidden, even from herself. "My apartment doesn't have heat," she admitted. "She needs warmth to recover." "I have a guest house behind my place," Ethan said softly. "Private, safe, warm. You and Sienna can stay, just until she's better." Alina raised her eyes to his. For the first time in what felt like years, she didn't look away. "Just temporary," she whispered. "Just temporary," he agreed. And then there was silence. But this time, it didn't feel like hopelessness. It felt like a pause, a moment to breathe. Ethan's guest house stood behind a quiet garden, its ground carpeted with yellow maple leaves. It wasn't big, but it was clean, bright, and warm enough for Sienna to sleep through the night without a single cough. For the first time in months, Alina herself managed to sleep for more than 3 uninterrupted hours. She didn't ask Ethan anything, and he didn't push. They coexisted like 2 strangers tied by something fragile, a child and an old memory never fully closed. One afternoon, while Sienna napped, Ethan stepped in holding a brown envelope. He placed it gently on the coffee table and looked at her with steady eyes. "I think you need to see this." Alina opened the envelope. Inside were printed documents, emails, photographs, legal papers. The first image stopped her heart. Jake, with his arm around a brunette at a party, taken the day before he accused her of cheating. Next, an email exchange between Miranda and a lawyer. They discussed drafting a fake separation agreement, one designed to trick Alina into signing it without legal representation. Then, a bank statement, transfers into Jake's account from a construction firm previously flagged for contract fraud. Alina stared in silence. It had all been a setup. Jake didn't push her out of his life because of a drunken impulse or jealousy. He and his mother had plotted it. Every move. Every lie. Sienna was just a pawn in their calculated game of power and money. "I hired a private investigator," Ethan said quietly. "After I saw you at the clinic, I knew something was wrong. I didn't expect it to be this dark." Alina couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she gripped the papers, fury rising in waves. Not just at Jake or Miranda, but at herself, for believing it was her fault. For years, she'd blamed herself for not being enough, not loving enough, not fighting enough. Now she saw the truth. She had been deceived, not by one man, but by an entire family. "What do you expect me to do with all of this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Whatever you want," Ethan replied. "If you want to walk away, I won't stop you. But if you want to fight..." She cut him off. "I'll fight." And this time, her voice didn't shake. Alina sat alone in the guest house, light from the window casting long shadows across her face, still taut with disbelief after Ethan's revelation. The documents lay on the table, cold, brutal truths in black and white, enough to dismantle the image Jake and Miranda had so carefully constructed for 3 years. She flipped through the pages. At first, her fingers trembled, then came anger, and finally, silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of awakening. She stared at the photo of Jake with another woman, his arm around her at a party, the day before he accused Alina of cheating. Then the emails, Miranda instructing a lawyer to draft a fake separation agreement to trap Alina before she regains financial control. She remembered that rainy night, clutching Sienna, walking into the storm, believing she was a failed wife, a bad mother. For years, she had blamed herself. Maybe Jake had a point. Maybe she hadn't been enough. Maybe her love was flawed. But there were no more maybes. The truth lay plain before her. She hadn't failed. She hadn't betrayed. She hadn't abandoned anyone. She had been hunted. Jake and Miranda hadn't just discarded her. They had strategically preyed on her. They had chosen the moment she was weakest, postpartum, when she was exhausted, sleepless, in pain, and vulnerable. They knew she had no family nearby, no legal representation, and no financial strength to push back. And they had been right until now. The ache in her chest gave way to rage, but not the wild kind, the quiet, focused kind that sharpens into resolve. For the first time, she embraced a truth she had never dared admit. She wasn't fragile. They had just caught her off guard. She stood, slowly but with purpose, no longer haunted by the question, "Why me?" Now her inner voice was clear. They picked the wrong woman. Behind the door, Sienna still slept, her tiny breath steady. That child, her daughter, was living proof that Alina had survived, had endured, and for her sake, Alina wouldn't fall again. This time, no one else would tell her story. She would write it herself. That morning, Alina wore a simple white blouse and tied her hair in a high ponytail. No makeup, but her eyes were sharp. She dropped Sienna off at a new hourly daycare center, gave her a quiet kiss on the cheek, and stepped back outside, a folder of documents in hand. She arrived at the law office at 9 a.m. It was tucked inside an older riverside building, its sign reading, "Miriam Connors, Attorney at Law," the name Ethan had once mentioned. Specialist in wrongful custody cases and contested divorces. Miriam was a woman in her 40s, soft curls framing a calm but firm face. She didn't waste time. After flipping through the documents Ethan had compiled, photos, emails, legal evidence of manipulation, she looked up and said, "You have a strong case, but you'll need to be ready for a real fight." Alina nodded. "For 3 years, I was blamed, exiled, erased. I don't need easy. I need justice." Over the next few weeks, Alina and Miriam built the case, petitioning to regain sole custody, annul the coerced separation agreement, and reclaim personal property. They gathered testimony, the emails from Miranda, a former legal assistant from the law firm that drafted the fake documents, and financial records proving Alina had made no suspicious expenses when she was accused of infidelity. Jake initially ignored the court notices, but when his lawyer was legally required to respond, he showed up, for the first time in 3 years, at a closed preliminary hearing. Alina watched him walk into the courtroom, clean-shaven, tailored suit, the same smug expression she remembered. He didn't flinch when he saw her, just glanced briefly as if she were no one. But this time, she didn't look away. Inside the hearing room, Miriam presented each piece of evidence clearly. Verified server timestamps on the emails, the time-stamped photo of Jake with another woman, and a recorded statement from a former employee of Miranda admitting they'd been instructed on how to wear Alina down. Jake lashed out, raising his voice. His attorney tried to intervene, but he shouted, "She doesn't deserve that child. I was protecting my daughter from someone who couldn't even hold a family together." That's when Alina stood. She faced the panel, her voice steady. "I held that baby through 8 hours of labor. I raised her alone for months with no help. I stayed up at night just to make sure she kept breathing. The only one who abandoned Sienna was him, and the one who was thrown out was me." No one spoke. 2 weeks later, the ruling came down. The separation agreement nullified Alina, granted full custody. Jake, ordered to pay legal fees and emotional damages. Miranda, under investigation for legal misconduct. Alina didn't cry. As she stepped out of the courthouse, she held Sienna's hand, now a spirited 3-year-old, and leaned down to whisper, "We don't have to be afraid anymore." After the trial, Alina expected to feel victorious. Instead, she felt empty, not disappointed, just unsure how to breathe after 3 years of surviving, fighting, defending. And yet, the silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was the space between chapters, the moment before something new could begin. That night, with Sienna fast asleep, she sat alone on the small sofa in the guest house. The warm yellow glow of the lamp cast soft shadows on the wall, and suddenly she cried. Not sobbing, not loud, just silent tears, the kind that fall when you've been strong for too long. Ethan entered quietly. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He didn't try to hold her like in the movies. He simply sat beside her, steady, present, close enough that she knew you're not alone anymore. She turned toward him, eyes red but calm. "I've stopped trusting people, but I'm tired." Ethan nodded. "You don't have to be strong around me." And for the first time, Alina allowed herself to lean on someone without fear of being pushed away. In the weeks that followed, Ethan didn't force his way into her world. He didn't try to replace anything. He simply showed up. When Sienna got sick, when Alina worked late, when the washing machine jammed, or a picture needed hanging. And then one Sunday afternoon, as they sat eating ice cream on the porch, Sienna suddenly pointed at Ethan and giggled. "New daddy." Alina froze. So did Ethan. She turned to Sienna, ready to gently correct her, but the innocent clarity in her daughter's eyes stole the words from her mouth. Ethan didn't say anything. He just looked at Alina, waiting. Not demanding, not expecting promises, just a quiet, unspoken question. "If you're ready, I'm here." Alina reached out and took his hand, fingers lacing softly. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch at trust. And for the first time after everything, she knew she could love again. One spring morning, the guest house garden burst into bloom. The lavender and hydrangeas Alina and Sienna had tended for weeks now bloomed proudly. Ethan led Alina along the stone path, hand in hand, saying nothing, until they stopped beneath a white wooden arch draped with flowers. He dropped to one knee. In his hand, a simple ring, a small glinting stone catching the soft morning light. No crowd, no fuss, just the breeze, the blossoms, and the sound of her heartbeat. "I can't promise I'll always get it right," he said, smiling, "but I promise to always show up, to listen, to walk with you. Will you marry me, Alina?" She laughed through tears. "I thought you'd pick somewhere more romantic. With you and Sienna here, anywhere is romantic." Their wedding was small, warm, a few close friends, lawyer Miriam, Jenna from the diner, and some single mothers Alina had connected with in recent months. Sienna walked down the aisle in a tiny white dress, holding a miniature bouquet and wearing a silver bracelet engraved with "Forever Family." That day, no one cried out of sorrow, only joy, quiet, real, and enough. A few months later, Alina launched her first project, Second Start, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping single mothers who'd been pushed aside by legal systems, financial barriers, or simply a lack of hope. She shared her own story on the homepage, not to play the victim, but to say, "You are not wrong. You're just at the part of the road where you keep going." Alina knew life would still bring its trials, but this time she wouldn't walk it alone. She had Sienna, she had Ethan, and most of all, she had herself back. Nearly a year after the final court hearing, the sentence was made official. Jake received 8 years in prison for fraud, abuse of custodial power, and document falsification. Miranda, once hailed as a model figure in local business circles, was fined and barred from any legal practice for the next 10 years. Alina didn't attend the sentencing. She was at Sienna's preschool graduation. Her daughter wore a white dress, a paper crown she made herself, and stepped up onto the tiny stage to sing "You Are My Sunshine," off-key, but fearless. Ethan sat beside her, holding the camera, eyes misty. Alina looked at her little girl, a life once born into chaos, now laughing under sunlight. Peace, at last, wasn't just a dream. These days, Alina no longer lives in fear. She doesn't flinch at a knock on the door, doesn't avoid questions about the past, doesn't bow her head when walking past places that once held pain. She's a mother, a wife, a founder of a nonprofit, and above all, she is herself, complete and whole. Each evening after work, she returns home, where Sienna waits with warm hugs and Ethan stirs dinner on the stove. They share stories about their day, play soft music, and laugh like life never fell apart. But Alina knows it was in those moments of breaking that she learned how to love again, the right way, and the right people. She writes the final line in her soon-to-be published memoir, "Some hearts aren't just broken, they're reforged in fire and truth. And when they beat again, they don't just survive, they lead."